Welcome to The Wealthy Healthy, the podcast and blog dedicated to inspiring better mental, physical, and financial health. I'm your host, Ricky Newton, and today's Financial Fridays episode is going to be an introduction to the concept of financial independence. The reason I want to talk about this before anything else is that this concept has been the primary driver of a huge shift in how I personally view my own finances, and I've watched a number of my close friends develop a similar interest in better understanding what it means and how it works. So with that being said, today's episode is fairly ground floor in the sense that I'm not really going to dive too deep into the math, and I'm not going to talk too much about how the concept relates to early retirement or semi-retirement. I'm going to try also to avoid including too many personal opinions or views on this episode. My main goal with today's episode is to simply get us all on the same page with a few different definitions of the term, and to get you thinking about whether some form of financial independence would be a priority for you, along with a couple of very, very simple mathematical examples for how financial independence, early retirement, and traditional retirement work. Over the course of the show, I'm going to refer back to this concept, and we'll spend more time in future episodes focused on the math, the actions to speed up the process, whether it's possible with a late start or with debt, and so on. So without further ado, really in simple terms, financial independence is generally defined as the accumulation of enough wealth to cover living expenses with income generated passively from the interest on investments. So in other words, having enough money that you could quit your job and never go broke. A lot of the time you'll hear this referred to as FI or FI, or sometimes FIRE or FIRE. All of it just stands for financial independence and early retirement. There are several common motivations for achieving financial independence. Perhaps you desire simply to feel free from the stress of work. If you're completely financial independent, you can continue to work under whatever load or circumstances or stress level you desire, because you no longer actually rely on that job for your expenses. This means that you can design your work the way you like. Now, maybe you're in another camp. You love your job. What financial independence actually would mean for you is if you love your job, now you can just go on and enjoy it regardless of pay. If you work in an office and you hate office politics, you can now feel safe and not partaking. If you work in an on-call or overnight profession like healthcare or construction, you can start to pick and choose your hours, which might allow you more sleep, better sleep. And of course, that ultimately improves your quality of life. You could switch to working part-time and enjoy the continuation of keeping busy with a career that you actually enjoy, but maybe that affords yourself more time with your kids or your family. You could dedicate then, of course, more of your time and energy to healthy exercise habits or outdoor activities that you enjoy. You could redouble your efforts towards hobbies that you only have time to do on the weekends. Maybe you would like to be able to take more frequent vacations or pursue a career you'd otherwise deem unrealistic due to smaller pay or lower pay ceilings. Now, let's say you absolutely love every single thing about your job, and there's nothing in the world you'd rather be doing. Then I truly, deeply, and genuinely applaud you for making your passion into a profession. I know people like that. I mean, my dad is a textbook workaholic type of guy. He dedicates most of his energy to his work, and he probably wouldn't have it any other way. He doesn't really pursue too many artistic hobbies like painting or music, and though he does write, it generally is for or about work. He genuinely enjoys the mental stimulation of a career and finds ways to exercise his creativity in his role there. Without work, he'd feel completely bored out of his wits within 3 or 4 days. Pretty much guaranteed. But even if that does describe you, let me ask you this. Would you be even happier if you knew that you could make your rent or mortgage payments no matter what happened to your job? If you could afford education for your family without any strain? That you had the peace of mind that if you or a loved one developed a health issue or sustained an injury, you could actually attend to fixing it without the added stress of wondering how you will ever pay for it. Perhaps you could make reasonable increases to your quality of life with the money that you continue to earn from your salary. You could safely blow every dollar that you make after financial independence on extravagant and indulgent spending because you've already built a nest egg that you can retire on. If any of those reasons resonate at all with you, then perhaps achieving financial independence or even partial financial independence would be a worthwhile pursuit for you. Because there's nothing wrong with loving your work. You should ideally love many aspects of your work. I don't think anyone should choose financial independence as a goal for the purpose of vegging out in front of a TV for 40 hours a week. Hard work is genuinely fulfilling. It can improve individual lives or entire communities. The sense of achievement, of course, is super valuable. For a lot of people, it's going to be really difficult to find that outside of work. And even outside of these more philosophical and psychological benefits to work, there's also literal and direct benefits, like your benefits. I mean, you have access to healthcare. It's often paid for in part or in full. Maybe you have a 401k, and that's got a match on it. So from a financial perspective, of course, that makes sense. Just like there's nothing wrong, though, with loving work or dedicating yourself to work or building your life around your work, there's also nothing wrong with being prepared and having a plan with your finances so that you can design your present and your future in whatever vision you see fit. The flexibility to follow life's shifting priorities is an amazing advantage afforded by having a little extra money saved up. Now, some are motivated by financial independence for totally different reasons. Perhaps you hate your job. You're somebody who, if you could avoid ever waking up to an alarm, you would. Maybe you'd like the freedom to take a nap in the middle of the day or go for a hike with your dogs as your lunch break. Perhaps you haven't found your career choice to be as fulfilling as you'd hoped, or maybe you've tried multiple different career paths already in search of that. I read online all the time that many cite sheer laziness as their motivation to work really, really hard right now to improve their incomes and their savings rates so that they can spend as much of their lives simply relaxing. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. You enjoy your job, but sometimes you think about other areas that you could be using your time. Maybe you've got multiple hobbies you'd like to dedicate a little more time to. Maybe you genuinely love your colleagues and that social aspect of your job, and you're enjoying mental health benefits of achieving at something. But on the other hand, maybe you also feel like you're missing out on watching your kids grow up, or you're not developing or learning other skills due to spending all of your time at work. All of these three different scenarios could benefit from achieving financial independence, or at the very, very, very least, developing some understanding of what the term even means and the different levels of it, so that at least with some exposure to this idea, you can find ways to make your relationship with money a healthy one that suits your desired lifestyle. A few times now, I've referred to partial financial independence or semi-retirement. What I mean by this is essentially reaching about half of your FI number in savings, such that your investment income can indefinitely cover half of your living expenses, leaving you responsible to make up the other half. So let's talk a little bit about that FI number. Let's take a step back and run a quick, simple math scenario. And let's go over some of the easy, quick rules of thumb as far as how to get your money to work for you. Now, as a quick disclaimer here, I'm going to use just some approximations of my own expenses as an example, and they may be very, very different from somebody else who's listening to this right now. If you've gotten this far and all you're wondering is if this is even possible, given your income or your expense levels or your debt, I will tell you now the answer is yes. Yes to all of the above. And I'll explain why that's true in a moment as well. But it's always important to keep in mind that everybody is being dealt totally different cards. The very fact, for example, that you are listening to the sound of my voice tells me that you have internet access and a device on which to consume this type of content. That alone is an advantage that many people don't have. You could take this idea to many, many levels. Now, the point I'm making is I want you to focus on the principles and the concepts that underlie this math and figure out how it fits into your life and your situation, and then assess whether you need to make any changes at all for financial independence or early retirement or even retirement at all to understand, hey, is that possible for me? Many, many people get close to retirement age and realize they don't have a single penny saved. They've blown every dollar they've made. And by that point, it may be too late to even enjoy the standard retirement that everyone thinks comes at age 65. Anyway, I don't want to get too much on a tangent about retirement, but I'm going to step off the soapbox and just get back to the point, which is that there are some really, really simple ways to figure out your FI number. The easiest way to know your FI number, which is, of course, the number at which working for money becomes optional to you, assuming you maintain the same lifestyle, the easiest way to figure it out is to multiply your annual expenses by 25. The reason this works is that this is the same math as assuming a 4% safe withdrawal rate from your nest egg each year to cover expenses. In a future episode, I will dive a little deeper into safe withdrawal rates, but to put it simply, this is the amount that you can reliably take out of your investment accounts each year without the total principal of your nest egg shrinking year over year. Again, this is something I will deconstruct a little more thoroughly in another episode. Now, when you're trying to calculate your expenses, I highly recommend you take the time to really look at your expenses the past maybe 2 or 3 months, category by category, in a spreadsheet or on paper, whichever way you prefer. But don't guess. I think most people do not correctly estimate monthly and annual expenses. And I can tell you that because I think a lot about my budgeting and a lot about my finances, and I'm still shocked when I actually run the numbers and figure out that I'm spending more than I thought in a certain area, or even less than I thought in a certain area sometimes. Not 2 months before the time of this podcast, so pretty late in 2016, I just ran a breakdown of a couple months worth of expenses in a spreadsheet and found out that I was averaging $650 a month on food and drinks. That's $650 a month just for myself. I don't have any kids or anything like that. And that's when I really thought that I was spending about $300, $400, maybe less than that. So on seeing that, I immediately cut back. For absolutely no noticeable decrease to my quality of life, I've actually dropped my spending in that category for the following 2 or 3 months now to about $200 to $300 a month. That's including a trip wine tasting in Napa and with a weekend lunch and a dinner date here and there. So that's around $400 a month or $4,800 a year that I can dedicate to savings. When I ran these numbers, I also found that I spent about $300 to $400 a month on non-vital fun things. For me, this is generally upgrades to things I already own, like a nicer electric razor or a new pair of shoes or a new pair of jeans or a new cell phone battery. These are mostly things that I can get by without pretty easily, but I just felt like, hey, you know what, I may as well have it. I also include some expenses there like weekend travel and entertainment such as concerts and sporting events, but I personally get a much better morale and happiness boost from entertainment expenses compared to material expenses for the most part. So I forced myself to cut down in that material fun spending category by about half as well, which I also found really, really easy. It basically just came down to 2 or 3 fewer impulse buys on Amazon, things of that nature. I still went out most weekends and enjoyed a concert or a trip to the movies or something like that, but was able to bring that spending down to about $200 a month without much struggle. So that's another about $150 a month or so, which is $1,800 a year to save. I'll break down more of my monthly expenses in another episode dedicated to the value of understanding and building a budget. And in that episode, I will share more strategies about actually going about building a budget. But these 2 examples are enough to give you a sense of what actually happened to me when I ran this pretty recently. I took a single hour, maybe 2 hours, to track my spending in a spreadsheet. And I was able to basically gave myself a raise of $6,600 a year. And I didn't have to work any harder. I didn't have to actually get a raise at work. I didn't have to actually really be any better at work. Really, the decrease to my quality of life is probably very, very, very marginal. I will admit, probably that there's some decrease there. I do like to eat nice food, but very marginal decrease. So I highly, highly recommend you figure out your current spending habits before trying to calculate this FI number. Now, why does that $6,600 a year matter? It's the difference between my annual expenses being about $38,600 versus $32,000. And that's all in. So I live in the Bay Area, so that's Bay Area rent, which is like $5 million a month. And then utilities, paying down on a reasonable car, a new car, not like a super, super cheap car, but a reasonable car for sure. Insurance, food, phone bills, the whole shebang. So let's figure out my FI number in both scenarios. If my expenses are $38,600 a year, I would need to save $965,000 in order to quit my job and potentially never work for money again. At $32,000 a year, I need to save $800,000 to achieve complete financial independence. A $165,000 difference. If I'm saving, say, $20,000 a year, the latter example gets me to a retirement safe position about 8 years sooner. There's one very important thing to recognize though, which is that the only thing that determines when I reach financial independence is savings rate, not the amount, the rate. So if you make $50,000 a year take home pay and your expenses are $20,000 a year and you're able to save $30,000, that's 60%. 60% is your savings rate. In this scenario, it would take you 16 years and 8 months to have saved enough to retire, assuming you're starting with $0 in net worth. So no debt, but no savings as well. So if you graduate from a 4-year school at 22 years old with $50,000 take-home pay, and you never, ever, ever get a raise, and you never, ever increase your lifestyle needs from $20,000 a year, you would be free to retire, if you desired, before your 39th birthday. Again, this is really simple math. It does not consider really normal life events, like maybe you buy a house or have some kids. Of course, it ignores the benefits of compounding interest as well during your path, which could make that come sooner. And you may graduate with some debt, and maybe you don't take home 50 grand right out of school, and maybe at the same time you get some raises along the way. But again, keep in mind, this is just to illustrate savings rate math in a really, really clean and simple way. The point is, your savings rate would be 60% in that scenario. If your friend graduates the exact same day as you, but earns $100,000 a year take-home pay, and her expenses are $40,000, and she saves the remaining $60,000, so she saves twice as much as you do in an objective measure, it takes her the exact same amount of time to retire because her savings rate is also 60%. To support her lifestyle, she needs about $1 million saved in investments, and it would take her about 16 years and 8 months to achieve that. Let's run one more example. You know a guy, maybe he's a Wall Street investment banker type, maybe a successful surgeon, and he makes $300,000 a year take-home pay. But this guy lives a crazy high-consumption lifestyle. He rents a center of downtown condo alone. He drives a Maserati and he buys a new high-performance car every couple of years, which he stores in private garages that he pays a couple $100 a month per car in order to have access to. He spends thousands a month on food and bottle service and just as much on entertainment, and he loves to take an extravagant trip here and there. Now, I know that this lifestyle sounds like a good deal of fun to a lot of people, and undeniably, it's got its perks, right? Some of those things like traveling a lot, that would be really cool. But this friend of yours, at the end of the day, only saves $5,000 a year, and he spends the rest. In order for your friend, once he turns 65 years old, to retire, but to maintain his outrageous lifestyle, he would actually need about $7,080,000 saved. At his savings rate of $5,000 a year, it would only take him 1,416 years to retire. Now, even if he reduced his post-retirement expenses to $100,000 a year, maintained the $5,000 a year savings rate, he would need to work for another 457 years before he could comfortably retire. But let's say he saves 60%. So just like you making $50,000 and just like your friend making $100,000, this wealthy friend of yours saves $180,000 a year, and he lives on $120,000 a year. That means he needs about $3 million to retire. That's his FI number. And saving $180,000 a year, so 60% savings rate, it would take him 16 years and 8 months to be financially able to leave his job forever. Again, if he chose to. I want to stress, of course, that there's a ton of factors that are being ignored here, right? Like compounding interest is an important one that this math isn't really well accounting for, but no amount of compounding interest nor no amount of high earnings can save you if you're spending way more than you're saving. So yeah, of course, the amount you earn is an important factor in achieving financial independence and early retirement if that's your goal, or just retirement all, certainly for saving for traditional retirement, but there's no replacement for saving as much or more than you spend. All right, everyone, thank you for tuning in. As always, feel free to share your thoughts, your praise, your criticism. All of that just serves to make the show better. And of course, as well, be sure to check out the blog and other content on thewealthyhealthy.co and subscribe to whichever medium you prefer.